Despite being just as important to the game, defensive play is often overlooked in regards to a basketball player's legacy, and this runs true for former Pistons center Ben Wallace. In this video, I'm going to give you the case as to why Ben Wallace should be in the Basketball Hall of Fame. Let's get into it. What is up, everybody? Jacob Dumars here, back at it again with another video today, talking to you about Ben Wallace, his case for the Hall of Fame. This is Amateur Hour Sports, where we give you raw and unfiltered sporting content 4 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel to stay up to date with all the insight and opinion on the sporting world, as well as informative videos on the history of sport. There are many great players who are either not in the Hall of Fame or are not yet in the Hall of Fame. And I think Ben Wallace is one of those players. I feel strongly about his case because of how overlooked he was on how good he was defensively. I know he was a bit of a liability on offense, but this guy is a four-time defensive player of the year. That is something that he is an absolute king on defense, and he also has an NBA championship to show along with the rest of his illustrious career. He was also a pivotal component of that NBA championship winning team. When it comes to a player's skill and how we look at them, we determine skill based on a player's offense, their dribbling, their shooting, their ability to take a guy one-on-one, post moves, that kind of thing. That's how we determine skill. And for guys who are focused on their defensive ability, we don't really focus on their skills on defense. Skill is just an offensive term, basically. And it's kind of weird because there's a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame who were great offensively, but were not great defensively. So we can overlook their deficiencies on defense because of how good they were on offense. But I'm calling to reverse this role for some players. Why can't we ignore the offensive deficiencies and focus on how dominant they were defensively? Now let's acknowledge that NBA championship for Ben Wallace. The Detroit Pistons were coming up against the Los Angeles Lakers in the NBA Finals in 2004. This was off the back of a three-peat of championships for a Lakers team run by Phil Jackson, who had Kobe just about his prime. They had prime Shaq and two other Hall of Famers on that team. I get that Karl Malone and Gary Payton weren't exactly in their prime anymore and were at the latter stages of their career, but still, a four Hall of Famer team. That Lakers team, who had just won 3 in a row and probably bolstered their team and roster to maybe the best it had ever been in that 4-year stretch, were heavily favored against the Detroit Pistons for that series. But despite the Pistons regarded to have less skill than the Lakers, they absolutely dominated them for that entire series, winning the series in 5 games and just crushing the Lakers in that ultimate Game 5. And a lot of it was down to Ben Wallace because Shaquille O'Neal was the man on that team. They had Kobe Bryant as well, obviously, but Shaquille O'Neal was coming off back-to-back Finals MVPs. He three-peated on Finals MVPs in that Lakers three-peat. So Ben Wallace had to keep a prime Shaq in check for that series, and he didn't exactly stop Shaq completely. Shaq still got some decent stats, but he did a tremendous number on Shaq in that series, kept him at bay, and was a pivotal component in not just guarding Shaq, but being able to guard other guys at the rim. But the problem with Wallace is that, well, if you thought Shaq was bad from the free throw line, you got to look at Ben Wallace because he's arguably the worst free throw shooter in NBA history. A career free throw shooting percentage of 41%. It's absolutely abysmal. You can't ignore that. And a field goal percentage of 47% when you're a center mostly getting dunks and layups in the paint. That is also quite atrocious. It's no secret he was very poor on offense. But clearly in the past, we have allowed basketball players who struggle on offense and are that good on defense to be in the Hall of Fame. Dennis Rodman is in the Hall of Fame, and that is a guy who averaged 7.3 points per game over the course of his career, only got above 10 points per game one time in his career, and we let that guy in the Hall of Fame, and he was pretty atrocious on offense. But Dennis Rodman has 6 rings. Ben Wallace only has 1 ring. So is that part of it? But Dennis Rodman only has 2 Defensive Player of the Years. Ben Wallace has 4 Defensive Player of the Years. That number of Defensive Player of the Year honors has never been bested. It has been equaled by one man, Dikembe Mutombo, who also has those 4 Defensive Player of the Years, and he is one of the greats, and he is in the Hall of Fame, though he does have a much more polished offensive game to him. But Ben Wallace is a rare case where his true defensive skill, defensive ability, defensive mindset is what made him so talented on defense, because Mount Mutombo is called that because he was basically a fucking mountain. This guy was 7'2" and was elite at defending the rim. But Ben Wallace was 6'9", going up against these guys who were 7 feet tall plus, like a prime Shaquille O'Neal who was 7'1". How on earth could a 6'9" Ben Wallace keep that guy in check? It's because he was so talented in his timing on defense, the ability to block shots. He could not rely on his height to block these guys at the rim. He had to solely rely on his defensive ability, and that is such a rare skill set to have, because centers can mostly rely on just being a huge presence at the rim. But Ben Wallace, so skillful, so talented at getting these defensive stops. At 6'9", he was even a block champ 1 year and a rebound champ 2 years. This guy averaged consistently above 10 rebounds per game, and over the course of his career, he averaged just under 10 rebounds per game at 9.6 rebounds per game. Even still going up against those 7-foot centers consistently, he still managed to win those 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. It's truly something remarkable to see how talented he was defensively. He monopolized that Defensive Player of the Year award in his time with the Pistons, winning 4 out of 5 years, and his defensive abilities were best displayed in that Pistons run to the championship, because again, he had to keep a guy like Shaquille O'Neal and other Hall of Fame Lakers players in check, and the Pistons kept them so much in check, and obviously other guys contributed like Chauncey Billups, but Ben Wallace, the key defensive figure in that team, keeping other Hall of Famers in check like Kobe Bryant. It's a tremendous feat what the Pistons pulled off there, just showing that hard-nosed defense can win a championship even if you don't have a star. And again, with that defense and being undersized, like I was saying, still tremendous at getting those rebounds, even against guys who were 7 feet tall. Much taller than he was. And that's the thing when it comes to great defenders being tall. There are guys in the NBA currently who are, celebrated for the defense, and rightfully so to a degree, like Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert is so tall and such a presence at the rim that he can get a lot of stops and blocks at the rim, but he does have a definitive lack of skill set when it comes to that. Obviously, very, very talented still, but he doesn't have that elite defensive skill set that Ben Wallace had, because he can rely on his height to get in these blocks. But if Ben Wallace at 6'9" missed his timing, he wasn't going to end up getting that block. But Rudy Gobert maybe doesn't even need to jump. Maybe just needs to be standing there and being that presence. But Ben Wallace needs to make sure his timing and his defensive talent is sharp in those moments to get those blocks, to get those defensive stops. It is rare to find such a tremendous defensive performer that his analytical statistics highlight how important he was in the winning of games for his team. These defensive abilities are so strong that Ben Wallace is in the top 20 all time when it comes to defensive win shares. In the NBA, he's in the top 15. And everybody ahead of Ben Wallace on that list of defensive win shares all time is in the Hall of Fame. And the 7 players under him are either all in the Hall of Fame or named LeBron James. So it is clear the impact that Ben Wallace had on the game, even without that tremendous offensive ability, because he contributed to so many wins for his team. And that contribution was noticed because even without an offensive game, he got into 3 All-NBA second teams and 2 All-NBA third teams, as well as being a 4-time All-Star. It's incredible that he got into these All-NBA teams and All-Star teams on the back of being just an elite defender and not having that offensive game. That's how good he was at defense. The Defensive Player of the Year award is essentially an MVP award for guys like Ben Wallace who solely focus on their defensive ability. They are the MVP of defense in the league. And if that reigns true, Ben Wallace won that 4 times. Ben Wallace is arguably the greatest ever when it comes to solely basing it off of their defensive skill and talent. And he's also definitely one of the greatest when it comes to just defense as a whole. Is he a Hall of Famer? Is Ben Wallace a Hall of Famer? I feel like I have made a firm case here, but in the comments down below, let me know. Is Ben Wallace a Hall of Famer, or is he not a Hall of Famer? And maybe give me some insight as to why you think that. I believe firmly that Ben Wallace should be in the Hall of Fame at some point. Don't make it the first priority to get him in the Hall of Fame, but he should be in the Hall of Fame at some point down the road. His defensive abilities and the way he could manipulate the outcomes of games by going up against some of the most elite centers of all time showcase just that we need to ignore the offensive part because he was that good on defense. If a player is that good on offense, we can ignore that maybe they aren't good on defense. And for Ben Wallace, we need to think the opposite because he was that good of a defender. We don't need to talk about that offensive game because maybe he never averaged a double-double in a season over his entire career, but he did average a double-double in an NBA final. One of the greatest defenders ever, playing as a 5 at only 6'9" in the early 2000s, is absolutely remarkable. Hall of Fame worthy. That's the end of this video. Be sure to like the video if you like and subscribe to Amateur Hour Sports for more content just like this as well. Hit that notification bell. We post 4 times a week on this channel. Make sure you stay up to date with all the content, mostly NBA, some soccer, and maybe here and there some other sports. Make sure you are stay tuned for more. At the end of the day, I believe what I say, and if you disagree, that's okay. We'll see you again next time.